was going to fix the hair. I was going to fix the hair. Between 2 and 3, I got to making 2 new things, which you don't see up there, but I could show you. 2 new slides. I am going to show you. Not to demonstrate that I'm always working, even though I am, but just because they're nice, and they're also great encouragement for coming to the classroom. So here, it probably already updated for you in some way, shape, or form. Yeah. Oh, I have to add them, I think. So now we have the Bookless classroom here. We've got, for the Bookless classroom, our Reader's Digest. Oh, I didn't. This looks, oh, and there's the early birds. There we go. And there's for our early birds as well. So we've got all of those up there. I'm just so happy about that. And let's get to our reading room. Anton Chekhov's 5 Great Short Stories. This is story number 2. Last story didn't end great, but I don't understand it. A painter's story. This is The House with the Mezzanine, a painter's story. It happened nigh on 7 years ago when I was living in one of the districts of the J province on the estate of Belokurov. A landowner, a young man who used to get up early, dress himself in a long overcoat, drink beer in the evenings, and all the while complain to me that he could nowhere find anyone in sympathy with his ideas. He lived in a little house in the orchard, and I lived in the old manor house in a huge pillared hall where there was no furniture except a large divan on which I slept and a table at which I used to play patience. Even in calm weather, there was always a moaning in the chimney, and in a storm, the whole house would rock and seem as though it must split. And it was quite terrifying, especially at night, when all the 10 great windows were suddenly lit up by a flash of lightning. Doomed by fate to permanent idleness, I did positively nothing. For hours together, I would sit and look through the windows at the sky, the birds, the trees, and read my letters over and over again, and then for hours together I would sleep. Sometimes I would go out and wander aimlessly until evening. Once on the way home, I came unexpectedly on a strange farmhouse. The sun was already setting, and the lengthening shadows were thrown over the ripening corn. 2 rows of closely planted tall fir trees stood like 2 thick walls, forming a somber, magnificent avenue. I climbed the fence and walked up the avenue, slipping on the fir needles, which lay 2 inches thick on the ground. It was still dark, and only here and there in the tops of the trees shimmered a bright gold light, casting the colors of the rainbow on a spider's web. The smell of the fire was almost suffocating. Then I turned into an avenue of limes, and here too were desolation and decay. The dead leaves rustled mournfully beneath my feet, and there were lurking shadows among the trees. To the right, in an old orchard, a gold hammer sang a faint, reluctant song, and he too must have been old. The lime trees soon came to an end, and I came to a white house with a terrace and a mezzanine, and suddenly a vista opened upon a farmyard, with a pond and a bathing shed and a row of green willows with the village beyond, and above it stood a tall, slender belfry on which glowed a cross catching the light of the setting sun. For a moment I possessed with a sense of enchantment, intimate, particular, as though I had seen the sense before in my child, as if I had seen the scene before in my childhood. By the white stone gates, surmounted with stone lions, which led from the yard into the field, stood two girls, one of them, the elder, thin, pale, very handsome, with masses of chestnut hair and a little stubborn mouth, looked rather prim and scarcely glanced at me. The other, who was quite young, 17 or 18, no more, also thin and pale, with the big mouth and big eyes, looked at me in surprise as I passed, said something in English, and looked confused, and it seemed to me that I had always known their dear faces, and I returned home feeling as though I had awoke from a pleasant dream. Soon after that, one afternoon, when Balakarov and I were walking near the house, suddenly there came into the yard a spring carriage in which sat one of the two girls, the elder. She had come to ask for subscriptions to a fund for those who had suffered in a recent fire. Without looking at us, she told us very seriously how many houses had been burned down in Sayanov, how many men, women, and children had been left without shelter, and what had been done by the committee of which she was a member. She gave us the list for us to write our names, put it away, and began to say goodbye. You have completely forgotten us, Petrovich, she said to Biklakurov as she gave him her hand. Come and see us. And if Mr. N, she said my name, would like to see how the admirers of his talent live and would care to come and see us, then Mother and I would be very pleased. I bowed. When she had gone, Petrovich began to tell me about her. The girl, he said, was of a good family, and her name was Lydia Volkaninov, and the estate in which she lived with her mother and sister was called, like the village on the other side of the pond, Sholkavka. Her father had once occupied an eminent position in Moscow and died a privy councillor. Notwithstanding their large means, of Volkaninovs always lived in the village summer and winter, and Lydia was a teacher in the Zemstvo, that's local elective assembly, school at Shalkovka, and earned 25 rubles a month. She only spent what she earned on herself and was proud of her independence. They are an interesting family, said Balakarov. We ought to go and see them. They will be very glad to see you. One afternoon during a holiday, we remembered the Volkaninovs and went over to Shakovka. They were all at home. The mother, Ekaterina Pavlovna, had obviously once been handsome, but now she was stouter than her age warranted, suffered from asthma, was melancholy and absent-minded, and she tried to entertain me with talk about painting. When she heard from her daughter that I might perhaps come over to Shalkovka, she hurried, called to mind a few of my landscapes which she had seen in exhibitions in Moscow, and now she asked what I had tried to express in them. Lydia, or as she was called at home, Lida, talked more to Belokarov than to me. Seriously and without a smile, she asked him why he had not worked for the Zemstvo, and why, up till now, he had never been to a Zemstvo meeting. It is not right of you, Petrovich, she said respectfully. It is not right. It is a shame. True, Lida, true, said her mother. It is not right. All our district is in Balaguin's hands, Lida went on, turning to me. He is the chairman of the council, and all the jobs in the district are given to his nephew and brothers-in-law, and he does exactly as he likes. We ought to fight him. The young people ought to form a strong party. But you see what young men are like. It is a shame, Petro Petrovich. The younger sister, Genya, was silent during the conversation about the Zemstvo. She did not take part in serious conversations, for by the family she was not considered grown up, and they gave her baby name. They gave her baby name Milieus, because as a child she used to call her English governess that. All the time she examined me curiously, and when I looked at the photograph album, she explained, "This is my uncle, this is my godfather," and fingered the portraits, and at the same time touched me with her shoulder in a childlike way, and I could see her small, undeveloped bosom, her thin shoulders, her long, slim waist, tightly drawn in by a belt. We played croquet and lawn tennis, walked in the garden, had tea, and then a large supper. After the huge pillared hall, I fell out of tune in the small cozy house, where there were no oleographs on the walls, and the servants were treated considerately, and everything seemed to me young and pure through the presence of Lida and Milieus, and everything was decent and orderly. At supper, Lida again talked to Belakarov about the Zemstvo and Balaguin about school libraries. She was a lively, sincere, serious girl, and it was interesting to listen to her, though she spoke at length and in a loud voice, perhaps because she was used to holding forth at school. On the other hand, Petro Petrovich, who from his university days had retained the habit of reducing any conversation to a discussion, spoke tediously, slowly, and deliberately, with an obvious desire to be taken for a clever and progressive man. He gesticulated and upset the sauce with his sleeve, and it made a large pool on the tablecloth, though nobody but myself seemed to notice it. When we returned home, the night was dark and still. "I call it good breeding," said Belakarov with a sigh, "not so much not to upset the sauce on the table as not to notice it when someone else has done it. Yes, an admirable intellectual family. I'm rather out of touch with nice people. Ah, terribly. And all through business, business, business." He went on to say hard work being a good farmer meant. He went on to say what hard work being a good farmer meant. And I thought, what a stupid, lazy lout. When we talked seriously, he would drag it out with an awful drawl, and he works just as he talks, slowly, always behindhand, never up to time, and as for his being businesslike, I don't believe it, for he often keeps letters given him to post for weeks in his pocket. "The worst of it is," he murmured as he walked along by my side, "the worst of it is that you go working away and never get any sympathy from anybody. I began to frequent the Volkanonov's house. Usually I sat on the bottom step of the veranda. I was filled with dissatisfaction, vague discontent with my life, which had passed so quickly and uninterestingly, and I thought all the while how good it would be to tear out of my breast my heart, which had grown so weary. There would be talk going on the terrace, the rustling of dresses, the fluttering of the pages of a book. I soon got used to Lida receiving the sick all day long and distributing books, and I used often to go with her to the village bareheaded under an umbrella, and in the evening she would hold forth about the Zemstvo and schools. She was very handsome, subtle, correct, and her lips were thin and sensitive, and whenever a serious conversation started, she would say to me dryly, "This won't interest you." I was not sympathetic to her. She did not like me because I was a landscape painter, and in my pictures did not paint the suffering of the masses, and I seemed to her indifferent to what she believed in. I remember once driving along the shore of the Baikal, and I met a Boryat girl in shirt and trousers of Chinese cotton on horseback. I asked her, were these cotton? I asked her if she would sell me her pipe, and while we were talking, she looked with scorn at my European face and hat, and in a moment she got bored with talking to me, whooped and galloped away, and in exactly the same way Lida despised me as a stranger. Outwardly, she never showed her dislike of me, but I felt it, and as I sat on the bottom step of the terrace, I had a certain irritation and said that treating the peasants without being a doctor meant deceiving them, and that it is easy to be a benefactor when one owns 4,000 acres. Her sister, Milieus, had no such cares and spent her time in complete idleness like myself. As soon as she got up in the morning, she would take a book and read it on the terrace, sitting far back in a lounge chair so that her feet hardly touched the ground, or she would hide herself with her book in the lime walk, or she would go through the gate into the field. She would read all day long, eagerly poring over the book, and only through her looking fatigued, dizzy, and pale sometimes was it possible to guess how much her reading exhausted her. When she saw me come, she would blush a little and leave her book, and looking into my face with her big eyes, she would tell me of things that had happened, how the chimney in the servants' room had caught fire, or how the laborer had caught a large fish on the pond. On weekdays, she usually wore a bright-colored blouse and a dark blue skirt. We used to go out together and pluck cherries for jam in the boat, and when she jumped to reach a cherry or pulled the oars, her thin, round arms would shine through her wide sleeves. Or I would make a sketch, and she would stand and watch me breathlessly. One Sunday at the end of June, I went over to the Volcaninos. In the morning, about 9 o'clock, I walked through the park, avoiding the house, looking for mushrooms, which were very plentiful that summer, and marking them so as to pick them later with Genya. A warm wind was blowing. I met Genya and her mother, both in bright Sunday dress, going home from church, and Genya was holding her hat against the wind. They told me they were going to have tea on the terrace. As a man without a care in the world, seeking somehow to justify his constant idleness, I have always found such festive mornings in a country house universally attractive. When the green garden, still moist with dew, shines in the sun and seems happy, and when the terrace smells of mignonette and oleander, and the young people have just returned from church and drink tea in the garden, and when they are all so gaily dressed and so merry, and when you know that all these healthy, satisfied people will do nothing all day long, then you long for all life to be like that. So I thought then, as I walked through the gardens, quite prepared to drift like that without occupation or purpose all through the day, all through the summer. Genya carried a basket, and she looked as though she knew that she would find me there. We gathered mushrooms and talked, and whenever she asked me a question, she stood in front of me to see my face. Yesterday, she said, a miracle happened in our village. Pelagaya, the cripple, has been ill for a whole year, and no doctors or medicines were any good. But yesterday an old woman muttered over her, and she got better. That's nothing, I said. One should not go to sick people and old women for miracle. Is not health a miracle, and life itself a miracle? Is something incomprehensible. And you are not afraid of the incomprehensible? No, I like to face things I do not understand, and I do not submit to them. I am superior to them. Man must think himself higher than lions, tigers, stars, higher than anything in nature, even higher than that which seems incomprehensible and miraculous. Otherwise, he is not a man, but a mouse, which is afraid of everything. Genya thought that I, as an artist, knew a great deal and could guess what I did not know. She wanted me to lead her into the region of its eternal and the beautiful. Into the region of the eternal and the beautiful, into the highest world with which, as she thought, I was perfectly familiar. And she talked to me of God, of eternal life, of the miraculous. And I, who did not admit that I and my imagination would perish forever, would reply, yes, men are immortal. Yes, eternal life awaits us. And she would listen and believe me and never asked for proof. As we approached the house, she suddenly stopped and said, oh, Lyda is a remarkable person, isn't she? I love her dearly and would gladly sacrifice my life for her at any time. But tell me, Genya touched my sleeve with her finger, but tell me, why do you argue with her all the time? Why are you so irritated? Because she is not right. Genya shook her head and tears came to her eyes. How incomprehensible, she muttered. At that moment, Lyda came out, and she stood by the balcony with the riding whip in her hand and looked very fine and pretty in the sunlight as she gave some orders to a farmhand. Bustling about and talking loudly, she tended two or three of her patients, and then, with the businesslike, preoccupied look, she walked through the house, opening one cupboard after another, and at last went off to the attic. It took some time to find her for dinner, and she did not come until we had finished the soup. Somehow I remember all these little details and love to dwell on them. And I remember the whole of that day vividly, though nothing particular happened. After dinner, Genya read, lying in her lounge chair, and I sat on the bottom step of the terrace. We were silent. The sky was overcast, and a thin, fine rain began to fall. It was hot. The wind had dropped, and it seemed the day would never end. Ekaterina Pavlovna came out onto the terrace with the fan, looking very sleepy. Oh, Mama, said Genya, kissing her hand, is it not good for you to sleep during the day? They ordered each other. When one went into the garden, the other would stand on the terrace and look at the trees and call, hello, Genya? Or, Mama dear, where are you? They always prayed together and shared the same faith, and they understood each other very well, even when they were silent, and they treated other people in exactly the same way. Ekaterina Pavlovna also soon got used to me and became attached to me, and when I did not turn up for a few days, she would send to inquire if I was well, and she too used to look admiringly at my sketches, and with the same frank loquacity, she would tell me things that happened, and she would confide her domestic secrets to me. She revered her elder daughter. Lyda never came to her for caresses and only talked about serious things. She went her own way, and to her mother and sister she was as sacred and enigmatic as the admiral sitting in his cabin to his sailors. Our Lyda is a remarkable person, her mother would often say, isn't she? And now, as the soft rain fell, we spoke of Lyda. She is a remarkable woman, said her mother, and added in a low voice like a conspirator's as she looked around, such as she have to be looked for with the lamp and broad daylight, though you know I am beginning to be anxious. The school, pharmacies, books, all very well, but why go to such extremes? She is 23, and it's time for her to think seriously about herself. If she goes on with her books and her pharmacies, she won't know how life has passed. She ought to marry. Genya, pale with reading and with her hair ruffled, looked up and said, as if to herself, as if she glanced at her mother, Mama dear, everything depends on the will of God. And once more she plunged into her book. Bilakurov came over in a long, close-fitted pleated coat, which is called a Padiavka, wearing an embroidered shirt. We played croquet. We played croquet and lawn tennis, and when it grew dark, we had a long supper. And Lida once more spoke of her schools and Belaguin, who had got the whole district into his own hands. As I left the Volkaninovs that night, I carried away an impression of a long, long idle day, with the sad consciousness that everything ends, however long it may be. Genya took me to the gate, and perhaps because she had spent the whole day with me from the beginning to end, I felt somehow lonely without her, and the whole kindly family was dear to me, and for the first time during the whole of that summer I had a desire to work. Tell me why you led such a monotonous life, I asked Bilakarov as we went home. My life is tedious, dull, monotonous because I am a painter, a queer fish, and have been worried all my life with envy, discontent, disbelief in my work. I am always poor. I am a vagabond. But you are a wealthy, normal man, a landowner, a gentleman. Why do you live so tamely and take so little from life? Why, for instance, haven't you fallen in love with Lida or Genya? You forget that I love another woman, answered Bilakarov. He meant his mistress, Lyubov Inavna, who lived with him in the orchard house. I used to see the lady every day, very stout, podgy, pompous, like a fatted goose, walking in the garden in a Russian headdress, always with a sunshade, and the servants used to call her to meals or tea. 3 years ago, she rented a part of his house for the summer and stayed on to live with Bilakarov, apparently forever. She was 10 years older than he and managed him very strictly so that he had to ask her permission to go out. She would often sob and make horrible noises with the man with the cold, like a man with a cold, and then I used to send and tell her that if she did not stop, I would go away. Then she would stop. When we reached home, Bilakarov sat down on the divan and frowned and brooded, and I began to pace up and down the hall, feeling a sweet stirring in me, exactly like the stirring of love. I wanted to talk about Volkaninovs. Lida could only fall in love with a Zemstvo worker like herself, someone who is run off his legs with hospitals and schools. I said, for the sake of a girl like that, a man might not only become a Zemstvo worker, but might even become worn out, like the tale of the iron boots. And Milieus? How charming Milieus is. Bilakarov began to talk at length, and with his drawling ers of the disease of the century, pessimism. He spoke confidently and argumentatively. Hundreds of miles of deserted, monotonous, black-ended steppe could not so forcibly depress the mind as a man like that, sitting and talking and showing no signs of going away. The point is neither pessimism nor optimism, I said irritably, but that 99 out of 100 have no sense. Bilakarov took this to mean himself was offended and went away. Okay, let me see where I am on time here. Oh, okay, let's keep going. Let me see what we've got here. Yeah, let's keep going. This is chapter 3 of this story, The House with the Mezzanine. The prince is on a visit to Malaziomov and sends you his regards, said Lida to her mother as she came in and took off her gloves. He told me many interesting things. He promised to bring forward in the Zemstvo Council the question of a medical station at Malaziomov. But he says there is little hope. And turning to me, she said, "Forgive me. I keep forgetting that you are not interested." I felt irritated. "Why not?" I asked and shrugged my shoulders. "You don't care about my opinion, but I assure you the question greatly interests me." "Yes? In my opinion, there is absolutely no need for a medical station at Malaziomov." My irritation affected her. She gave a glance at me, half closed her eyes, and said, "What is wanted then? Landscapes?" "Not landscapes either. Nothing is wanted there." She finished taking off her gloves and took up a newspaper which had just come by post. A moment later, she said quietly, apparently controlling herself, "Last week Anna died in childbirth, and if a medical man has been available, she would have lived. However, I suppose landscape painters are entitled to their opinions." "I have a very definite opinion, I assure you," said I, and she took refuge behind the newspaper as though she did not wish to listen. "In my opinion, medical stations, schools, libraries, pharmacies, under existing conditions, only lead to slavery. The masses are caught in a vast chain. You do not cut it, but only add new links to it. That is my opinion." She looked at me and smiled mockingly, and I went on, striving to catch the thread of my ideas. "It does not matter that Anna should die in childbirth, but it does matter that all these Annas, Marfas, Palagueyas, from dawn to sunset, should be grinding away, ill from overwork, all their lives worried about their starving, sickly children. All their lives they are afraid of death and disease and have to be looking after themselves. They fade in youth, grow old very early, and die in filth and dirt. Their children, as they grow up, go the same way, and hundreds of years slip by, and millions of people live worse than animals, in constant dread of never having a crust to eat. But the horror of their position is that they have no time to think of their souls, no time to remember that they are made in the likeness of God. Hunger, cold, animal fear, incessant work, like drifts of snow, block all the ways to spiritual activity, to the very thing that distinguishes man from the animals, and is the very thing indeed that makes life worth living. You come to their assistance with hospitals and schools, but you do not free them from their fetters. On the contrary, you enslave them even more, since by introducing new prejudices into their lives, you increase the number of their demands, not to mention the fact that they have to pay the Zemstvo for their drugs and pamphlets, and therefore have to work harder than ever." "I will not argue with you," said Lida. "I have heard all that." She put down the paper. "I will only tell you one thing. It is no good sitting with folded hands. It is true we do not save mankind, and perhaps we do make mistakes, but we do what we can, and we are right. The highest and most sacred truth for an educated being is to help his neighbors, and we do what we can to help. You do not like it, but it is impossible to please everybody." "True, Lida, true," said her mother. In Lida's presence, her courage always failed her, and as she talked, she would look timidly at her, for she was afraid of saying something foolish or out of place, and she never contradicted, but would always agree. "True, Lida, true." Teaching peasants to read and write, giving them little moral pamphlets and medical assistance cannot decrease either ignorance or mortality, just as a light from your windows cannot illuminate this huge garden," I said. "You give nothing by your interference in the lives of these people. You only create new demands and a new compulsion to work." "Ah, my God, but we must do something," said Lida, exasperatedly, and I could tell by her voice that she thought my opinions negligible and despised me. "It is necessary," I said, "to free people from hard physical work. It is necessary to relieve them from their yoke, to give them breathing space, to save them from spending their whole lives in the kitchen or the buyer in the fields. They should have time to take thought of their souls, of God, and to develop their spiritual capacities. Every human being's salvation lies in spiritual activity, in his continual spiritual activity, in his continual search for truth and the meaning of God. Give them some relief from rough animal labor. Let them feel pain. Then you will see how ridiculous at bottom your pamphlets and pharmacies are. Once a human being is aware of his vocation, then he can only be satisfied with religion, service, art, and not with trifles like that. Free them from work. Lyda gave a smile. Is that possible? Yes. Take upon yourself a part of their work. If we all in town and country, without exception, agreed to share the work which is being spent by mankind in the satisfaction of physical demands, then none of us would have to work more than 2 or 3 hours a day. If all of us, rich and poor, worked 3 hours a day, the rest of our time would be free. And then, to be still less dependent on our bodies, we should invent machines to do the work, and we should try and reduce our demands to the minimum. We should toughen ourselves, and our children should not be afraid of hunger and cold, and we should not be anxious about their health, as Anna, Maria, Pelagua were anxious. Then supporting, we did not bother about doctors and pharmacies and did away with tobacco factories and distilleries. What a lot of free time we should have. We should give our leisure to service and the arts, just as peasants all work together to repair the roads, so the whole community would work together to seek truth and the meaning of life, and I am sure of it. Truth would be found very soon. Man would get rid of his continual, poignant, depressing fear of death, and even of death itself. But you contradict yourself, said Lyda. You talk about service and deny education. I deny the education of a man who can only use it to read the signs on the public houses and possibly a pamphlet which he is incapable of understanding. The kind of education we have had from the time of Rurik and village life has remained exactly as it was then. Not education is wanted, but freedom for the full development of spiritual capacities. Not schools are wanted, but universities. You deny medicine too. Yes, it should only be used for the investigation of diseases as natural phenomenon, not for their cure. It is no good curing diseases if you don't cure their causes. Remove their chief cause, physical labor, and there will be no diseases. I don't acknowledge a science which cures, I went on excitedly. Science and art, when they are true, are directed not to temporary or private purposes, but to the eternal and the general. They seek the truth and the meaning of life. They seek God, the soul, and when they are harnessed to passing needs and activities like pharmacies and libraries, then they only complicate and encumber life. We have any number of doctors, pharmacists, lawyers, and highly educated people, but we have no biologists, mathematicians, philosophers, poets. All our intellectual and spiritual energy is wasted on temporary passing needs. Scientists, writers, painters work, and thanks to them, the comforts of life grow greater every day. The demands of the body multiply, but we are still a long way from the truth, and man still remains the most rapacious and unseemly of animals, and everything tends to make the majority of mankind degenerate and more lacking in vitality. Under such conditions, the life of an artist has no meaning, and the more talented he is, the more strange and incomprehensible his position is, since it only amounts to his working for the amusement of the predatory, disgusting animal, man, and supporting the existing state of things. And I don't want to work and will not. Nothing is wanted, so let the world go to... Nothing is wanted, so let the world go to hell. Milieus, go away, said Lyda to her sister, evidently thinking my words dangerous to so young a girl. Jenya looked sadly at her sister and mother and went out. People generally talk like that, said Lida, when they want to excuse their indifference. It is easier to deny hospitals and schools than to come and teach. True, Lida, true, her mother agreed. You say you will not work, Lida went on. Apparently, you set a high price on your work, but do stop arguing. We shall never agree. Since I value the most imperfect library or pharmacy, of which you spoke so scornfully just now, more than all landscapes in the world. Well, right there. And at once she turned to her mother and began to talk in quite a different tone. The prince has got very thin and is much changed since the last time he was here. The doctors are sending him to Vicky. She talked to her mother about the prince to avoid talking to me. Her face was burning, and in order to conceal her agitation, she bent over the table as if she were short-sighted, and made a show of reading the newspaper. My presence was distasteful to her. I took my leave and went home. This is Dr. Annette Feravich. We are on chapter or story 2 of 5 great stories from Anton Chekhov. This one I fully appreciate. I hope that you get. I hope you get it. Wow. This is March 11th, and that is a Russian author. Read about that author. Wow. Dr. Annette Feravich, thanks so much for joining me here. And I don't know. I just think about who were those Russians fighting like that so philosophically. Dr. Annette Feravich, because we don't hear much about them. That is like a a culture that it seems like American society has wanted blotted out for a very long time. Dr. Annette Feravich, it is classroom day 222. It is March 11th, and we are done with Wednesday. Thanks so much. Wednesday here in the classroom. Thanks again for joining me. In every way, we are working to make your mind, your body, and your spirit healthier. Thanks.